My experience is that I was a rape victim back in 2020. I reported my ex-boyfriend at the time, who had video evidence of the crime that he recorded himself. And I thought, wow, I'm finally getting out of this relationship, which I was struggling for the moment I met him until then to get away from him. But it literally took nearly 2 years for it to even go to trial. And it was shocking to me that as a victim, I had to fight, to be heard, to have the case investigated.
In 2018, my sister and my niece were murdered just outside my sister's house. Raneem, on the day of her murder, she called the police 5 times begging for help. She was never heard and seen, and she was told to go back home and call 999 if he attacked her. She knew her destiny. She told me one day, "Auntie, I think my life's coming to an end. He's going to take my life." At the time, I didn't believe her because I believed in the system. And yeah, she was right.
These statistics are overwhelming, demonstrating the scale of the problem. But there is the element of it being woven into the fabric of society, and that's when you really get an idea of how big a problem this is. And how does a government, whether it be Conservative, Labour, effectively tackle this?
Long term, I think the only solution to tackle violence against women and girls is preventive education, preventive measures where everyone knows what is abuse, what is misogyny, teaching both boys and girls what is right and what is not right.
The tip of the iceberg is the attitude towards domestic abuse in the country needs to change. That involves everything, evolving the system, reforming the police. Prevention and early intervention is the key for this.
There's a big question about trust as well, isn't there? We talk about trust in politicians, trust to deliver on these promises, but fundamental to this issue is trust in police. And Juliana, you actually said that through your now work and campaigning, you speak to other victims, and would you recommend that a victim go to the police? Probably not.
I feel like when the system that's in place to protect you actually damages you, that traumatizes you even more than the actual crime itself, it needs to change. It's not doing good enough, and until it changes, unfortunately, I can't recommend victims to come forward. It's horrific.
Yvette, it was quite something to sit here today and to listen to these women's stories and about how they feel women and girls are being let down. How did you feel sitting with them today?
Yeah, we heard from some incredibly brave and strong women, but who have also been so badly let down by the police and criminal justice system, and who are fighting for something better for other women. And I think that's the problem, is that violence against women and girls has just not been taken seriously enough by the police, by the criminal justice system, and by governments for far too long. And that is why we want to make it part of Labour's mission around tackling crime to halve violence against women and girls over the next 10 years. We know that is a really ambitious mission, but it's so important. We cannot carry on like this.
You're also saying police forces will be told to use counter-terror and organised crime tactics to keep women safe. I'm interested in that element of it, how you think that would create effective change.
Too often, when cases are reported to the police, they will talk about, well, what's the credibility of the victim? Well, what do we do looking at the circumstances around the victim, rather than actually investigating the perpetrator, and rather than actually going after the perpetrators and identifying if there is different pieces of intelligence that might have been reported because actually there were other cases reported that maybe never made it to trial, and to look at gathering all of that evidence together and identifying who that shows are potentially the most dangerous perpetrators of all.
You can record all the data you like, know about the perpetrators, gather all this information, but the victims and the survivors will say what happens next, because more people are coming forward, but prosecutions and convictions have halved. None of what you've been talking about today can be done without some action on some big problems affecting police, prosecutions and prisons.
Yeah, so we have to have action at every stage along the system. So the police have to take abuse and violence against women much more seriously. For example, we want to have the 999 control rooms have specialist domestic abuse experts in those control rooms straight away. So that, for example, the terrible case of Raneem Uda, who called 999 4 times the night that she was murdered, and no one came. We cannot have that happen to any other family. So you have those experts in place, but we secondly need to overhaul the system of protection orders. Domestic abuse protection orders, for example, they're barely used when they could be in order to do more to keep women safe, to keep victims of abuse safe.
But there's a bigger fundamental issue at play here with police and trust. A recent YouGov poll, 50% of people in the UK don't trust the police to deal with violence against women and girls. So it's about holding police to account and police reform. Where do you stand on that? Because that is the first hurdle.
Yeah, we have to have policing reform. We have to have standards increased. Look, there are some amazing police officers who are doing everything they can to get prosecutions and to go after offenders, but when you have those terrible cases, and obviously what's happened to Sarah Everard, after that we thought things would change. And yet those standards have still not been increased.
So what does police reform look like under a Labour government?
So first thing is we need proper national vetting standards, mandatory national vetting standards, which must include if anyone has any history of violence against women and girls, they should be barred, automatically barred from being in the police. We have to also have standards around automatic suspension if someone is being investigated for domestic abuse or for sexual offences. It is just unbelievable to me that I still come across cases where a police officer has been investigated for domestic abuse and is actually not suspended from the force. It's a double trust failure. So first of all, it's the failure because of some of those really awful cases. And secondly, it's a failure because too often women are let down.
Nour, it's about trust, but it's also about hope. You wouldn't be here today, both of you, if you didn't think there was an opportunity to change this by whichever party forms a government in July.
There is hope, and I am optimistic. We need a strong fundamental work to be done, framework to put support in place and evolve everything from the start. It is a journey, and it's going to be long, and it's not easy, but I am very optimistic about what could happen in the future.
Incredibly brave women there talking to us a little earlier. We also heard from Labour's Yvette Cooper there, and earlier on this afternoon I also spoke to the Safeguarding Minister, Laura Farris, and I asked her what the Conservatives would do to tackle violence against women.
When we came in 2010, I think it would be true to say something like domestic abuse was something that was seen as quite a sort of small issue. Do you remember the days when they would talk about just a domestic? He's knocking her around a bit. I think we have totally transformed the conversation on domestic abuse. Things like recognising coercive control as the characteristic that underpins almost all domestic abuse. We criminalised that in 2015. We passed the Domestic Abuse Act. If you look at rape, there was a period in this government when rape prosecutions were too low, and we undertook the end-to-end rape review and implemented that. Since then, we are now prosecuting 56% more rape cases than when we came in, and rapists are serving, on average, 50% longer behind bars.
Less than 3% of rape offences received a charge or summons in the last quarter. In almost 40% of cases, as you point out there, the victim dropped out of the process before anyone was charged. So something is clearly wrong here with the way that victims are being treated, trying to get justice. So, you know, you're asking people to go out and vote in July. And they'll be looking at your record over the last 14 years on violence against women and girls and securing these prosecutions and convictions and the way you support victims. Do you feel that that's good enough?
One of the things I would just invite you to consider is this. Since we implemented the end-to-end rape review, we published that in 2021, we have tripled the number of cases that are getting prosecution. So to give you an example of one force, the Met Police hasn't always had a good reputation. The Met Police has quadrupled the volume of cases it's sending to the CPS for a charging decision. Another thing that we have done is we have got 4,500 specialist trained police officers. They're now deployed across all 43 forces in England and Wales. We have working in the system nearly 1,000 independent sexual violence advisors. These are people, lay people, not judges, not barristers, not police officers, people who are part of victim support, and they can hold a victim's hand through every single stage in the criminal justice process. We know that that keeps victims engaged. All of this collectively has transformed rape outcomes, and we are seeing women getting justice every single day of the week in this country.
A lot of what we talked about today in discussing violence against women and girls comes down to trust. Trust of the police. It's not good amongst the public when coming forward to report these kind of crimes. And there's a lack of trust in politicians as well to address it properly. And given the scandal that's going on at the moment and the allegations of gambling on the date of the election, can you see how a scandal like this, in the context of many other political scandals, feeds into this narrative of not being able to trust politicians, whether it's something huge like violence against women and girls or the fact that you may gamble on the date of the general election? Can you see where the issue is with the public at the moment about trust?
Well, I think, partially accept what you're saying to me. Of course I do. I think when there's any incidents where either it's a police officer or a politician behaving badly, that undermines public confidence, and it does so in a profoundly damaging way. I don't think, but I'm not going to sort of get into the betting thing, because I know the Gambling Commission are looking into that. But may I just say this? There are women in politics. There are ministers like me in the Ministry of Justice. None of us have any of this stuff against us, who have worked day and night over the last few years to try and address these issues. I hope that people feel that violence against women has leapt up the political agenda, and that's partly due to the work of politicians. Yes, we overall as a collective, people may have a low view of politicians, but I hope they believe that there are some of us in that place who are completely committed to the work that we do.